It was hard to imagine that in the 21st century, some cities in the United States would be slowly swallowed by a kind of silence born not of peace, but of collective resignation. What were once vibrant centers of work, movement, and hope now reveal only vestiges of what once sustained the American dream, leaving entire streets marked by broken windows, stagnant commerce, and abandoned structures that seem to observe time with the melancholy of those who know they are being forgotten. The impression is that the richest country in the world faces such a profound internal erosion that it can no longer hide the cracks that appear in entire regions where the population decreases year after year, as if an invisible force were driving thousands of people away from these places, once proud of their own history. Under the watchful eye of journalistic analysis, it becomes evident that the phenomenon can no longer be treated as a simple economic fluctuation or a natural consequence of demographic changes, because the speed at which these communities are losing inhabitants surpasses any known pattern, revealing a silent collapse that spreads across the edges of the map like an undeclared warning. Each empty house, each closed school, and each abandoned block functions as a symbol of what is unraveling before the eyes of a country that tries to maintain the appearance of normality, while its deepest structure deteriorates steadily and with increasing visibility. And while observers are still trying to comprehend the true extent of this decay, something even more unsettling emerges from the subtext of this gradual disappearance, suggesting that what is being seen now may only be the surface layer of a much broader process, which begins to reveal its true dimension when one investigates what is actually happening in these cities buried by silence. The atmosphere surrounding these abandoned territories evokes a disturbing feeling that the country is not only losing inhabitants but something much deeper, as if the collective identity is being slowly unraveled, thread by thread, while entire communities cease to exist almost without a trace. There is a constant impression that the cities are not only becoming empty, but being erased little by little like old photographs that fade with time until they become unrecognizable. And this silent transformation provokes the feeling that an uncomfortable truth is approaching, revealing that the disappearance of these places may be just the first sign of a larger problem that the country hesitates to admit. And in this scenario, where every abandoned street seems to carry questions that no one wants to answer, an inevitable point of reflection arises about what is really behind this accelerated emptying, not just as a geographical phenomenon, but as a direct reflection of something that moves in the depths of American society and that may be about to become impossible to ignore. Which city, do you think, will disappear first? And more importantly, why is nobody talking about it? If this topic raises the same questions for you that we're raising here, take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel and leave a like now. This helps the investigation continue and ensures you don't miss the next chapters of this scenario that no one else is explaining. As this landscape of abandonment expands, more visible signs begin to emerge that the process is not limited to a simple population decline, but to a structural collapse that manifests itself in every detail of the daily lives of the disappearing cities. In residential neighborhoods once full of activity, a different rhythm is observed, marked by the absence of voices, the progressive closure of small businesses, and the constant presence of houses that remain locked for years, as if time had decided to stagnate there. The main avenues reveal deteriorated facades, dust-covered shop windows, and old "for rent" signs that become symbols of futile resistance in the face of a local economy that can no longer sustain even itself. The phenomenon becomes even more evident when analyzing essential services, which are rapidly declining. Hospitals reduce hours, schools operate at half capacity, and police stations function like isolated islands in a territory that has lost the social vitality that kept it stable. The workforce dwindles without replacement, and young adults leave in search of opportunities that no longer exist there, leaving behind communities composed mostly of elderly people and families who cannot afford the costs of relocation. This combination generates a peculiar scenario of silent decay, in which the absence of people creates a kind of social echo, perceptible even in areas where there is still activity. This progressive emptying reveals a clear symptom, cities are not only losing residents, but are being slowly drained of their social, economic, and emotional function, as if the country were gradually erasing entire regions from its map without publicly admitting that something profound has gone out of control. And while this process continues to advance almost invisibly, the inevitable need arises to understand who or what is behind this accelerated transformation and why so many prefer to avoid this answer. But what is really causing this silent exodus, and why do certain places seem doomed even before they understand what is happening? When the evidence of abandonment accumulates, with such clarity, it becomes inevitable to investigate the roots of this process, which does not arise spontaneously, but as a result of decisions made far beyond the reach of the communities that now face depopulation. Analyzing the history of these cities reveals a recurring pattern that repeats itself with almost surgical precision. First comes the gradual closure of factories and industries that for decades sustained thousands of families. Then, economic policies emerge that favor large corporations at the expense of small workers, followed by the forced migration of residents who can no longer support themselves in the face of rising living costs, declining wages, and lack of opportunities. This process, often masked by official speeches using terms like adjustment, transition, or modernization, reveals a deeper and more uncomfortable structure in which corporate interests and political decisions intertwine to drive entire regions to a state of economic irrelevance. While companies transfer their operations to other countries in search of cheaper labor, local governments find themselves unable to react, watching the dismantling of their own economies with an impotence that becomes even more evident when promises of revitalization are nothing more than perfunctory speeches. The prevailing narrative attempts to attribute the decline to natural or inevitable factors, such as technological changes or cultural transformations, but close analysis reveals something different. These cities were left behind not for lack of potential, but because they were classified as unprofitable within a system that prioritizes immediate profit over the survival of entire communities. The abandonment was not accidental, but a consequence of specific choices that favored a few while condemning many to gradual disappearance. And as we understand this silent mechanism that pushes cities to collapse, an even more unsettling question arises that demands an answer. If these regions were sacrificed for greater interests, what happens when the impact of this process begins to affect areas that previously seemed untouchable? When one observes the unfolding of this process over the years, it becomes evident that the disappearance of these cities does not represent an isolated event, but the beginning of a chain of effects that extend far beyond their geographical boundaries. As small communities lose population and resources, the pressure on neighboring regions silently increases, creating a cycle of weakening that affects entire transportation, commerce, and infrastructure systems. Roads that were once busy begin to register minimal traffic, transportation lines are deactivated, and local businesses that depended on consumption from these cities begin to operate at a loss until they inevitably close their doors. This domino effect is not limited to the economic aspect. It increasingly impacts the social and psychological fields where problems such as food insecurity, housing instability, and a significant increase in crime are observed in areas that lose the capacity to sustain essential public services. The lack of jobs generates forced displacement, and this displacement creates overloads in urban areas that already face their own challenges, resulting in social tensions that accumulate without an adequate response from the authorities. The decrease in tax revenue further aggravates the situation, leaving municipalities unable to maintain public lighting, policing, assistance programs, and basic healthcare, while previously vital structures deteriorate with no prospect of recovery. As the collapse progresses, it becomes clear that the impact is no longer confined to the vanished cities, but is slowly approaching larger centers, revealing that no place is completely immune when the entire country operates on fragile foundations. Each lost community becomes a silent warning that, added to so many others, points to a future in which economic and social pressure can reach even regions that today appear stable. And in the face of this scenario that expands like an invisible crack across the map, an inevitable question arises. What happens when the void left by the fallen cities finally reaches those that still stand? As the impact of declining cities spreads across the country, it becomes evident that the collapse manifests not only in the aging physical structures lacking maintenance, but also within a society that is becoming increasingly emotionally fragmented. The phenomenon of silent streets and abandoned houses reveals more than economic losses. It exposes a profound weariness that has settled in the population, reflecting a weariness accumulated over decades, in which the accelerated pace of work, consumption, and competitiveness has eroded the sense of belonging and emptied the community ties that sustained collective identity. This exhaustion, previously perceived only in large metropolises, is now spreading to smaller regions, where isolation ceases to be a lifestyle and becomes the direct consequence of a society that has lost its connection to its own purpose. In many of these places heading towards disappearance, a growing paradox is observed. Despite the increased presence of technology and the unprecedented speed of information flow, people demonstrate a growing sense of disconnection, as if surrounded by means of communication, but unable to truly communicate. The silence of these cities echoes not only in the empty streets, but also within individuals who find themselves distanced from meaningful human connections, seeking refuge in memories of a past where simplicity seemed to offer more security and meaning than the excess of stimuli of the present. The emptiness that pervades these regions acts as an emotional mirror, revealing that urban decline accompanies the decline of expectations, dreams, and belonging. This combination of physical decay and emotional emptiness suggests that the crisis lies not only in the disappearance of cities, but also in the internal transformation of a country that seems to be losing its identity as it progresses. What if this silently spreading emptiness is not just a symptom but a sign that something even deeper is being obscured by the official figures? When one goes beyond the emotional surface surrounding the disappearance of these cities and observes the phenomenon through official data, an even more disturbing scenario is revealed, as the numbers released so far represent only fragments of a more complex reality, marked by statistics that rarely receive public attention. In several regions of the United States, especially in industrial areas that have lost their economic base over the last few decades, the rate of household debt exceeds levels historically recorded during recessions, demonstrating that a significant portion of the population remains trapped in student loans, insolvent mortgages and credit cards that consume all available income. The combination of stagnant wages, a constantly rising cost of living, and reduced opportunities creates an environment where financial survival becomes a daily task, leaving millions of people vulnerable to any instability that arises. Furthermore, recent surveys show that more than 30 million Americans regularly rely on food banks to supplement their diet, a number that surpasses statistics from periods considered critical in the country's history, such as the Great Depression. This growing dependence indicates that hunger is not an isolated event in marginalized communities, but a structural component of daily life that now affects groups considered stable just a few years ago. Simultaneously, the significant increase in abandoned properties accompanies the decline in economic activity in entire regions, creating high-risk zones where basic services fail and public presence becomes increasingly rare. These indicators, when analyzed together, reveal that the disappearance of cities is merely a visual synthesis of a collapse that spreads silently, obscured by the apparent strength of the large metropolises that still manage to maintain a facade of stability. And what do these numbers suggest when they point to a future in which even the most prosperous areas may face the same erosion that is already consuming entire regions of the country? As the dataset reveals an increasingly fragile panorama, it becomes evident that the disappearance of these cities represents not just an isolated chapter in contemporary history, but a warning that extends beyond their borders, indicating that the country as a whole may be heading towards a crisis whose true depth has not yet been fully understood. The signs emerging from the already affected regions act as early markers of a process that expands slowly but without interruption, demonstrating that economic and social instability does not respect geographical boundaries and has the potential to reach areas considered safe until recently. This fragility is especially clear when the urban centers themselves, which previously remained as poles of stability, begin to face increasing pressures caused by the arrival of displaced populations, the rising cost of living, and the inability of local institutions to absorb new demands. Meanwhile, experts in demography and economics point to trends that are quietly accelerating, such as the continuous decline of the young workforce, the decline of crucial industrial sectors, and the escalation of social problems that exceed the capacity of the authorities to respond. This combination creates a scenario that resembles a slow-motion domino effect, in which the fall of small communities heralds the possibility that larger centers will soon face similar challenges, albeit on a larger scale. The impression is that the country is approaching a critical point where it will no longer be possible to ignore the convergence of these factors, and each new weakening city adds more weight to a national structure that is already operating at its limit. Given this trajectory, the perception arises that the collapse will not occur abruptly, but through a succession of signs that, added together, indicate the inevitable advance of a profound and irreversible transformation. What if all these signs are pointing not just to an urban crisis, but to something much bigger that the country is not yet prepared to face? When the sum of all these signs becomes impossible to ignore, the need arises to understand that the disappearance of these cities represents not only a geographical change, but a deeper revelation about the emotional, social, and structural state of a country that, despite its image of power, lives with fissures that widen each year. The silence that hangs over these abandoned places carries not only the absence of inhabitants, but reflects a kind of collective despondency that spreads across the nation like a shadow that advances at a constant pace, exposing fragilities that have been accumulated over decades of questionable decisions, growing inequality, and a progressive disconnect between what the country believes itself to be and what it has actually become. As entire regions fade away, it becomes evident that the collapse does not begin the moment the last house is left behind, but the instant people cease to believe that it is worthwhile to remain, fight, or rebuild what has been lost. This perception is amplified when one observes that the disappearance of these cities reveals the depth of a crisis that permeates all levels of society, indicating that the future will not be defined solely by economic indicators, but by emotional and existential choices that will determine which regions will be able to resist and which will succumb to silent emptying. The disappearance of a city does not happen overnight. It develops slowly until one day it becomes clear that what once existed no longer exerts influence over those who remain. In this way, each city that falls becomes a reminder of the fragility of the very idea of national stability, highlighting that the country faces a complex crossroads, where the past, present, and future meet in a delicate balance. If this type of investigation and analysis is important to you, subscribe to the channel now, because other unspoken truths like this need to be understood before they disappear before our eyes.